Hello and welcome to the Natural History Museum of Utah's Fox Squirrel Data Showcase. I'm Ellen Erickson, Manager of Citizen Science Programs at NHMU, and for the next hour, we'll be joined by three members of the museum's collections and research team, Dr. Eric Rickert, Katrina Dierig, and Dr. Lynn Zumo, to share exciting information about the fox squirrel and how citizen scientists like you have made an impact on this research. We'll give you some time to ask some of your questions at the end as well. While we were hoping to do this presentation with you in person at the Natural History Museum of Utah, we've shifted gears to chat with you here in the digital space once again. Thank you for joining us here, and a special thanks to NHMU's marketing team for helping us make this happen, especially the incomparable Mark Johnston. In this era of virtual gatherings, it's important to reflect on our own physical sense of place, the land we occupy, and honor the Indigenous peoples who have called it home, acknowledging that all Indigenous nations are living communities. The Natural History Museum is part of the University of Utah, who acknowledges the Salt Lake Valley has always been a gathering place for Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. The Natural History Museum of Utah is committed to illuminating the natural world and the place of humans within it, and our citizen science program connects people to the scientific practice, harnessing the power of community to learn more about the world all around us. Our Fox Squirrel Research Project is an excellent example of this power of community. And over the past several years, hundreds of people have submitted thousands of observations on squirrels in Utah, leading to data collection that would not have been possible otherwise. Today marks the first time we're sharing some of our findings with you, the people who have been helping us collect data. And for the next hour, we'll share some statistics and observations with you, and we'll open it up to questions. During the presentation, you'll be hearing from Dr. Eric Rickert, Curator of Vertebrates at NHMU, Dr. Lynn Zumo, NHMU's Curator of Learning Sciences, and during the Q&A, we'll also be joined by Katrina Dierig, NHMU Vertebrate Collections Manager. As questions arise, please type them into the Q&A on the bottom right corner of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can after the presentation, and we'll wrap up at the hour. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Eric Rickert to get things started. Eric, take it away.
Okay. Well, welcome, folks. Do I have control of this now? Okay. So, first thing to get across is that fox squirrels are not native to Utah. They are native North American mammals, but their native range is in the Midwest and the eastern part of the United States. The first fox squirrels were introduced into California more than 100 years ago, and they've since been introduced in other parts of the country. This is an old map, and it does not show a star in northern Utah, which it should. A little bit on tree squirrel anatomy. Squirrels are rodents, and like all rodents, they have ever-growing incisors. The front teeth, or the incisor teeth, have open roots, and they're constantly growing from the base. The tooth continues to develop from the base. As it grows, it moves out, and it's worn down during use. They're particularly good at gnawing at material, and that's very important for tree squirrels, which generally eat hard nuts. Tree squirrels also have very long and powerful hind legs, and also legs that allow them to move their feet more freely, their hind feet, than for instance, we can, so that they can climb directly down a tree and still hang on with their hind foot claws. So many of the behavioral and even morphological features of squirrels are a result of them being diurnal, that is active completely during the day and highly arboreal. Clearly, their acrobatic skills are one of those things. But another thing has to do with geographic variation in coat color. Squirrels, because they're diurnal, they have very, very acute vision, and they have color vision. So squirrels, unlike most kinds of mammals, are very, very colorful. And perhaps the most colorful and the most variable squirrel in North America is the fox squirrel. And you can see some of the different color morphs here. Their common name, fox squirrel, comes from the fact that this color morph, this orange, is very common throughout most of the range. The scientific name is for the black fox squirrel in the south, which is shown here. Types of forests that fox squirrels are native to, or the type of habitat that they're native to, are eastern deciduous forest, primarily deciduous forest, oak hickory, maple beech, mixed forest in the Appalachian region, and then other types of forest include southern pine and also western riparian forests, which occur on these riparian corridors in the western states. Their principal food reflects their principal habitat types. Squirrels, most squirrels, and tree squirrels in particular, are omnivorous. Their diet includes a variety of plants, fungi as well are incredibly important, and then protein from insects, bird eggs, and small mammals, and birds. But the most important food items are hard tree nuts: hickory, walnut, pecan, acorns, in the past even chestnuts, and in American Southeast, pine as well is very important. These sorts of habitats are not available in the Salt Lake urban forests. We have plenty of trees, not many that are principal food items for the squirrels. We do, however, have trees that are planted in the Salt Lake Valley that do provide these things. For instance, the black walnut is quite common throughout much of the Salt Lake Valley. And there are other tree species that produce seeds that can be used. A little bit of background on their reproduction, because this is important in terms of the demographics of the squirrels, how they grow, how the population grows and spreads. So two types of nests are used: tree cavity nests. Up here on the top left, we can see a Sherman's fox squirrel, one from the southeast, attending young that are in the cavity nest. Another kind of nest, which is very common and has become commoner over the last few years in the greater Salt Lake area, are tree nests, leaf nests, or drays, one shown here on the bottom left. Now, there are two primary mating seasons of fox squirrels, and throughout their range, and they seem to hold also here in Salt Lake Valley. There's a midwinter and an early summer breeding season. Midwinter is probably the most important. Individual females may breed in either of these time periods. A few will breed during both of them, but not in general. The gestation period after mating is 45 days, and at birth, the young are very helpless, what we refer to as altricial. They don't have any hair, their eyes are closed. But over the next 6 to 8 weeks, they grow up. These are some in a nest. During the nesting period, the adult female, the mother, may be moving these from site to site, possibly to keep them safe from tree predators. But in any event, they are weaned generally at 10 to 12 weeks. The young become independent shortly thereafter. Young females may reproduce at 8 months of age, but generally they wait until after a year. It's also the case that the average litter size can vary between 2 to 3, and actually a maximum of 7 has been seen. The proportion of females that breed and litter size are linked to food availability. Annual adult survivorship may be as high as 60%, an average adult longevity can be 8 years for males and 13 years for females. So very highly productive and very long-lived. Nonetheless, there are many predators. The top right here, we see a fox squirrel moving towards a Cooper's hawk. This is in Chicago, Illinois. On the left top, we see a coyote that's killed a fox squirrel. This may have actually occurred, we know it occurred in the city cemetery up in the foothills. Other predators include smaller carnivores like weasels, although I have to point out that this is not a fox squirrel. This is a Eurasian red squirrel. In the center photo, snakes will often take tree squirrels, climbing snakes. This is a rat snake. It's taken a gray squirrel. I couldn't find a picture of one taking a fox squirrel. And also humans. They're important small game. They're hunted in a variety of places in the eastern and midwestern part of the country. In the urban environment, squirrels face different challenges, and they also cause some problems from a human standpoint. At the right is a squirrel that is arced across 2 power lines, electrocuting itself, and in many cases, causing a power outage. The top left shows, again, Eurasian squirrels, that I couldn't find a fox squirrel doing this, a cavity nest in a building, in an attic. That's a problem with the squirrels in the Salt Lake Valley as well. Another thing is destruction or damage to trees by barking them, either to get underneath, get at the cambium layer that's an important food resource during the time of year when seeds and nuts are not available. But possibly also to wear the teeth down. Squirrels that are not eating hard nuts that are in their normal food, their teeth grow very rapidly, and if they don't keep them warmed down, you get a terrible situation as seen in this X-ray on the side, where the teeth actually continue to grow to the point where they're non-functional, and then they threaten the life of the squirrel. So on to some of our observations. We have nearly 2,500 observations that have been accumulated through iNaturalist going back to 2013. And also in the last 2 years, Survey 123 data that have come in during Squirrel Fest. Shown by the histogram here, there's been a great increase in citizen science participation over these times. These observations within northern Utah are shown here. All of the iNaturalist observations are presence only. That is, people make a natural history or iNaturalist sighting, and that's it. There's no information on where they don't cite squirrels. During Squirrel Fest, though, we purposefully made an attempt to get information on no observations, since that's also valuable data. So our first record from 2013 from iNaturalist is an animal or a sighting that was made at the along the Jordan River at the International Peace Gardens. In 2014, there were a total of 2 observations. Nothing came in an iNaturalist in 2015, but in 2016, we're slowly getting more records, again, along the Jordan River, principally. Eventually, by 2017, we're getting some very outside records, one in Ogden here, and they're beginning to move up into the East Bench of Salt Lake. This trend continues in 2018 with observations in Emigration Canyon and south of I-80, further south in the Salt Lake Valley, also further west. By 2019, there are multiple observations in Emigration Canyon and the first observation in Provo and in Little Cottonwood Canyon. At this point, we have to admit that we learned that there were people who were trapping pest squirrels in the city and moving them up into Emigration Canyon and releasing them. Now, there may have been some natural travel up through Emigration Canyon, but we now believe that probably the animals that continue to increase in Emigration Canyon are a result of a founded population because of people releasing squirrels there. In 2020, they continuing to expand east in the Wasatch, and the first observation as far south as Spanish Fork. In 2021, the first record from Magna and also from Tooele. Now we know that we believe strongly that the Magna population represents a natural migration along power lines to, or other above ground lines to reach Magna. The one in Tooele, as in the case for maybe those in Utah County, are probably mediated by animals either being transported by humans on purpose or accidentally by getting into a vehicle. 2021, we have the first observation that's very far away in southern Utah near Cedar City. Again, this had to have been either an accidental or a purposeful introduction of an animal. So what remains in the future? Well, between 2021 and 2022, we saw a great increase continued increase of squirrels in northern Utah, and further spread, again, possibly because of humans transporting them, but possibly on their own steam. We don't know how much of that is going to go on, but we can say that with pretty good, I think, confidence based on what we've seen in the past, that they will continue to expand. So here we're going to get into some data that have been developed by crunching, as we say, observations only from the Squirrel Fest data by our colleague, Dr. Patty Carneely, who's a museum volunteer. What we know are that we have a number of variables that we're interested in. The ecological variables at particular localities, types of trees, the presence of utility lines as access points to get in and move beyond, the presence and absence of other squirrels that are potential predator or potential competitors, and what the available food resources are. We're interested in basic categorizations of behavior and demography. So what we're sharing here from Patty's work are some statistically significant observations, highly statistically significant in all cases. We know that fox squirrels strongly prefer areas with deciduous trees and with mixed tree habitat. Red squirrels, on the other hand, require evergreen trees in their habitat as well. And also, the absence of fox squirrels. We know that there are places where they occur together, cheek to jowl, but we know that fox squirrels, apparently from this, are able to exclude red squirrels. Fox squirrels much prefer areas that have some canopy and are also strongly tied to sites with utility lines for easy access. Some examples of local squirrel habitat. The vast majority of sightings have been in residential yards, parks, open space, other kinds of open space, other areas, much less so. The types of trees where animals occur are predominantly where there are deciduous trees, either by themselves or mixed with evergreen trees. But very, very rarely do we see them in areas with evergreens only. This was an interesting observation that Ellen made, a picture that she took when we were doing a Squirrel Fest activity at the International Peace Gardens. It's a tree nest, but one that's completely atypical. It's close to the ground. It's in a ponderosa pine, and it's very large. It's huge, and it was made by weaving together ponderosa limbs, ponderosa twigs. This was occupied by a female with her litter of at least 3 young. Some insights into behavior that have come in from citizen scientists. include such really cool things as an image of a squirrel eating maple tree flowers. This is a very, very important food source before the hard nuts come on. Also things like buds and seeds of things other trees like elms, and also fungi and bulbs that they can dig up in people's gardens. I've seen that in my yard. Some of the commonly observed behaviors: climbing, of course, in these arboreal animals, running and jumping, chasing, fighting, foraging, as we see, and also caching, which is much less commonly seen, but it's an incredibly important behavior. It allows these squirrels to get the hard nuts that will be preserved in the ground for some period of time, and they can then be used in times of the year way beyond the production of those nuts. So here I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague Lynn Zumo, who will tell you something about what she's learned of citizen science research.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Eric. My name is Lynn Zumo, and I'm the curator of learning sciences at the museum. And what that means is that I do research on how people learn. And my goal with my research is to design better and more effective learning environments, especially for science as time goes on. So I started a research project this year on Squirrel Fest and on this citizen science project more broadly, with the goal of trying to understand why people participate, what motivates them to participate, and what and how they learn through participation in this citizen science project. And what I am aiming to do with this information is develop a case study on what I see as this really unique project that shows how closely humans are connected to their natural environment. Because a lot of times citizen science projects have you go out in nature and maybe look at things that you don't ordinarily look at. But this project is really about documenting the ways that you interact with and live with squirrels on your day-to-day basis. So I have some very, very early findings that I hope to refine more over the next few weeks. And that's really centered around people's relationships with squirrels, and in particular, their emotions about those squirrels are really key to participation and influence what people learn from this experience. So this has been an exciting project to work on, and I will have more results to share in the next few weeks and months. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Q&A to hear from you all.
Thanks so much, Lynn, and thank you, Eric, for the fabulous presentation. For everyone tuning in, if you've got questions, type them into the Q&A functionality that you should see at the bottom right corner of your screen. We'll be monitoring it. To get things started off, Eric, I've got a question. So you're talking about this fabulous citizen science participation on the project. Clearly, that's a key component of what the Fox Squirrel Research Project is. Can you speak to how citizen scientists have impacted the research moving forward?
Well, I think one of the most important things is just by sheer numbers of observations. The work that Patty Corneely did was dependent on having dozens and dozens of observations, basic observations of what kind of trees were present, what kind of behavior was being shown. And although we could guess that some of these things might go on based on what we know about fox squirrels, we didn't know for certain. And so the sheer number of observations are really great, but then they're just the individual things that people see and question, that they have questions about. And I can say that for me, one of the most satisfying things that's happened since we started this project was meeting people in person when we met at some of the parks, the kinds of conversations that we had, where I learned by talking with them and interacting with them. I had some aha moments where some things clicked in terms of my being able to make sense about some of the things that I'd seen. For instance, the dental anomalies that some of the squirrels had, the fact that their teeth were growing too quickly, And I'm convinced that it is due to the fact that many of the squirrels, most of them, are dependent on non-natural foods that cause problems in terms of their growth, because chewing on a hickory seed or a hickory nut or a black walnut requires some pretty strong dentition that will wear the tooth down very well, whereas eating bird seed from a feeder doesn't do that. So I think that that's an example, and I wasn't able to put those things together until it was talking with people. So those kinds of interactions are really great. The individual observations that people are making, the pictures that people have made on iNaturalist, those sorts of things are incredibly valuable in actually getting at least photo vouchers to verify that what they saw, and the kinds of aberrant behaviors that squirrels seem to have. I say aberrant, like not being afraid of people or not being afraid of dogs, which is very, very odd and very dissimilar from wild fox squirrels in the eastern part of their range that I'm familiar with.
Kyle's wondering, speaking of dogs, if there's any data on fox squirrels interacting with pets or raccoons.
The only data that we have are, for sure, are animals that were presented to the museum as specimens that were killed by dogs. And there were several of them that we received that way. In fact, 4 of them from one dog in particular that was, not a hunting dog, but just could get really close to them. So that's, I don't know if I answered your question, Ellen.
Well, that's what I think it's fine. And I know that in our survey that the museum's put together on survey 123, we get fabulous descriptions from people who are submitting these observations to us, and sometimes they do include other species. I personally don't recall seeing anything with raccoons, but we really are in the early stages of mining through these observations. We're talking well over 1,200 observations that have been submitted, and so it takes time to look through that stuff.
Well, one of the things
certainly something we'll look at.
One of the things about raccoons is they're principally nocturnal, and so maybe there are important interactions that are occurring because raccoons can climb quite well. Robbing nests and getting young squirrels out of nests and things of that sort may be something, but that may not be something that would show up on the citizen science radar. But there are lots of really cool observations that people have made that have been unexpected on my part.
There's some fabulous questions coming into the Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to ask these. We're going to get through as many as we can here. So I'm just going to start up at the beginning again. Gail's curious on how leaf nests are constructed and held together.
I don't know really exactly how they're constructed. Big balls of leaves. You often see tree squirrels moving with broad leaves, with deciduous leaves, and going up to the crotch of a tree and just building a platform first, probably weaving twigs and things of that sort to make a canopy over it, because it becomes a ball nest, and it's often lined with shredded tree bark and things of that sort that might be a better insulator than just the leaves by themselves. The drays are, in my understanding, often commonly used during the warmer months, but they're also used in the winter, like that big Ponderosa Palus that you found. But I've noticed that, when I first started seeing squirrels on the east side up by the university, I didn't see very many drays. So my feeling is probably the really prime nest sites may have been cavity nests that were taken. But cavity nests they're not constructed by the squirrels. They have to be natural cavities taking over a flicker nest or something like that. Whereas a dray is something that the squirrels themselves can make, but it may be an inferior nest during the cold months. Squirrels are very good. I mean, they're highly insulated with their winter pelage. Their bushy tail serves as a blanket. That's one of several functions that it has. It's also a device that can be used to signal other squirrels, and it's also analogous to a tightrope walker's pole that they can use for balance. But yeah, the drays are really cool. All tree squirrels use them to a certain extent, and they are very obvious. They're very obvious, and particularly in the winter. I think they're increasing in number.
We have a couple questions coming in about bird feeders and feeding squirrels in the backyard. Kelly's wondering, do we know much about backyard bird feeding and how it's influenced the spread and success of squirrels? And Christina was wondering something similar.
Well, we haven't crunched those numbers yet. We do have data on the presence of bird feeders from our observations. And I think Patty will eventually get to the point where I suspect that'll be shown to be a super important factor. That and the presence of particular kinds of trees, things like maybe a black walnut in somebody's yard, that would really be an important food item. But I think it's going to be bird feeders, because those are ubiquitous in a lot of places, and they do provide a lot of good food. But again, the problem being that it may not be the proper food in terms of their dental hygiene, for want of a better term. But we'll know. That's something that we're certainly keen on understanding. Good question.
Christina, following that up, was wondering about, she's had a feeder for years with regular squirrel visitors. And so if she moves and it stops getting filled, are squirrels going to be okay? That's her question.
Squirrels can move around really well, and they can find other sources of food, but they may be dependent on food from a feeder. So I'm not advocating that people feed millet and sunflower seeds to fox squirrels. There may be other things that could be better, and maybe some kinds of things that could be put out that would enable them to wear their teeth down more effectively. Now, you could go out and buy a bunch of English walnuts at the store and put those out, and that would be the closest thing to black walnut native food, and that would do the trick to help them. But you don't want to do that. That's too expensive. You may not even want them at your bird feeder, although they're incredibly good at circumventing anti-squirrel designs. But yeah, I think people are going to have to learn to live with them, both in the sense of encouraging them in a way that's safe for the squirrels and is safe for your attic and stuff like that. And also, learning how to just say, okay, well, I'm not going to get all the apricots off my tree this year. But please don't trap them and move them up in Emigration Canyon.
Harriet, as a follow-up to food, was asking, so feeding on kibble is not good for squirrels. Is that correct?
No, I mean, that's not going to wear their teeth down. I mean, they eat a lot of different kinds of things, including mushrooms and plant parts that are normally not going to be wearing their teeth down. But it's just my thinking that, and I don't have the empirical evidence to demonstrate this, at least not now, that some of the dental problems, and we've had several squirrels that have come in as specimens that have starved to death because their incisors grew too long for them to be able to chew or maybe even drink, and that's an issue. But I think all urban squirrels have to deal with that, And whether or not there'll be an adaptation, I don't know. But it's yeah, it's just one of the things we have to explore in understanding how these new arrivals interact with the urban ecology, including their interactions with people.
So Beth is wondering, are squirrels detrimental or beneficial to our area? And then as a follow-up, Dave's asking, are there any positive aspects of having squirrels around?
Okay. First of all, positive or negative depends sort of on your point of view. If you own an orchard in your backyard and it's being destroyed and decimated by squirrels, or if you have a building or an attic that they've gotten into that's cost you thousands of dollars to repair, then those are important things. From my standpoint, they haven't gotten into my attic yet. So I'm a mammalogist and I love tree squirrels. They're beautiful, they're acrobatic, and they're really cool. But even I have mixed feelings about it. My initial concerns were whether or not these were going to become naturalized beyond the urban environment and somehow compete with native species. Now I think that that's a naive thing. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that they'll be more or less restricted to the urban environment. We don't have a natural variety of foods that reflect the kinds of foods that they would be eating in their natural range in the Midwest and in the East. Katrina might not agree with me, but I think that that's the case. I think, though, that if they get to southern Utah or to some areas that have more kinds of natural things, that they may indeed get into that. Ultimately, I think that their presence will only be additive in adding another interesting species that is mostly in human modified habitat. I don't think that they'll be detrimental, but we don't know. We don't know for sure. There are diseases that fox squirrels can have that might be transmissible to native species. Anytime you move an animal or plant from its native range to another place, and if it becomes established, we're running the risk of destabilizing what would ordinarily be a more stable situation.
I just wanted to jump in when you mentioned disease. I saw a lot of questions about parasites, which I think is fascinating. When we get specimens from people that donate us, like roadkill specimens, usually how we get them. Some people trap them as well. We do check them for parasites. We check for ectoparasites, so like fleas, ticks, lice, things like that. And I haven't found any ectoparasites on fox squirrels yet. I've checked a few for endoparasites, so that means going through the GI tract looking for tapeworms, nematodes, things like that. Also have not found any evidence of endoparasites. And so that's one reason that having specimens is really important, because we can't, do that with observational data. But I'm continuing to look, because it would be interesting to know if there weren't specimens or parasites rather in these specimens, and if that's changing, right? And if they could potentially be spreading parasites to other squirrels in the community, but we don't have any evidence of that right now.
Katrina, while you're unmuted,
Yeah.
I've got another question for you. Actually, I'm going to combine two. Lauren's wondering if there are any tips to attract native red squirrels, because she misses having them around. And then Brewitt56 is wondering about silver squirrels in Salt Lake City, thinking they maybe saw one the other day in their yard. And they looked to see if it was a young fox squirrel, looked at pictures, but they're curious on your thoughts on that.
So red squirrels, they prefer pine trees. So if you want red squirrels in your yard, pine trees would be planting some big pine trees, but they're not very common in the urban environment. I'd say the most common place you see them is in Liberty Park, because there's a lot of big old pine trees there, right? But they're really pine obligate dwellers, the red squirrels. So that's why they're more common up in the mountains and in the canyons. As for silver squirrels, I'm guessing what you probably saw was a rock squirrel. So they're sort of more gray in color. They're about the same size as the fox squirrel and have sort of a splotchy pattern to them, or like a modeling pattern on their backs, but they're more gray. And so I'm guessing that's probably what you saw.
Yeah, and also they're ground squirrels.
Yes, they are ground squirrels.
They can climb, but much more awkwardly. They're not acrobatic. They can't make the leaps that fox squirrels do and other tree squirrels. Yeah, the interesting thing about red squirrels is that obviously they couldn't have moved into the Salt Lake Valley until there were trees. And I think that even the urban populations of red squirrels, as Katrina alluded to, probably are not doing as well and are they require other food sources. The ones in Liberty Park eat a wide variety of things. But the thing they can't do in the urban environment is make their winter cache of foods by cone middens, where they harvest the not quite ripe cones, and they store them oftentimes in water, in a stream, in a mountain stream, underneath where they're maintained, sort of refrigerated storage, and that's what they live on during the winter. So I think that they can't do that kind of thing in the Salt Lake Valley, and I think that's limited their numbers. I think the red squirrels are at a great disadvantage compared to what the fox squirrels do, because fox squirrels have always been more broad and omnivorous in their habits than red squirrels that are really cone seed or pine, other conifer tree seed specialists.
Then I have a question for you. This was one you answered in the chat, but I'd love for you to speak about it. Someone asked what kinds of emotional relationships people have with squirrels. Are they positive? Are they negative? And I'd love for you to speak on that for a minute.
Well, anytime emotions come up, they all seem to be very strong, which is one major finding, and a very large number of respondents. So if you've submitted data, if you've submitted squirrel data, you've probably come across the survey that's part of this project. It's at the end, perhaps you've filled it out and identified emotions yourself or other motivating factors. But there are a lot of people who participate because they feel very strongly positively about squirrels. They love squirrels, they love watching them. Squirrels provide enjoyment for them and their dogs and their pets and their families. It's a way to bring people together. I think somebody in the Q&A just mentioned a squirrel named Pumpkin in their yard. So there's a lot of positive emotions. Right now I'm finding more positive than negative, but there are also some very strongly negative emotions about squirrels, particularly people who have experienced squirrels living in their homes and getting into their attics and interfering with electricity and cable. So disrupting daily lives in that way. So it can go either way. I'm seeing more positive, but definitely seeing both.
Katrina, Nathan's wondering, why do squirrels chase each other in what looks like play fighting?
So there's a few different reasons that they might chase each other. Part of it could be males fighting for territory, chasing each other off out of their foraging area, fighting over mating opportunities. So if there are females that are ready to breed, there could be two males fighting over food resources, but also young litter mates will also chase each other. So you might have juvenile or subadult squirrels that are hanging out together near where they were born. And that's a common behavior that you'll see between litter mates.
There was another question as follow-up that was asking about flicking of tails for a fox squirrel. Does that mean anything specific?
So I don't know specifically what it means. Well, I don't know that any of us know what it means exactly, right? But it usually, I've noticed it when I'm looking at them and they know that I'm looking at them. And so it's, a sign of warning or maybe aggression that a lot of animals, try to make themselves look bigger. So it might be sort of this signal that, like, I'm aware of you and I'm ready to act. as at least how I interpret it. But I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Eric has more information on that.
No, I think you're right, Katrina. One of the things I've noticed is when the squirrels, give their bark, it's not really a bark, but it's a sharp thing. They simultaneously jerk their tail.
Yeah.
And so it's both a visual and an auditory warning or announcement. Here I am. And they do it. They do it so frequently. They'll do it in response to humans, but they also, I think, do it in response to dogs. I don't walk our dog very much. My wife does, but when they walk around the neighborhood, that's actually a way to get an auditory idea of how many squirrels are around, because they all start to do that. They all make themselves known to that dog that's moving through.
Rudy's wondering about chattering. Do fox squirrels chatter like red squirrels? They say that they saw their first fox squirrel in Park City in 2020. Do they make a chatter noise?
Not the same one that the red squirrels make. It's a different kind of vocalization. They do some soft kind of chatters, but not the kind of very loud one that the red squirrels do. I have sort of a tin ear when it comes to some of these things, but that's my impression.
Okay, sorry, I got lost in my scroll here. So I was going to ask you a different one, but I'm going to ask you this one. Bird feeders can attract mice and rats in addition to fox squirrels. Do rats pose a threat to squirrels?
That's an interesting thing. They do. The rats are nesting on the ground or under the ground. And indeed, they become very common in places where bird seed has been spread. They don't go up into the feeders themselves, at least I've never seen it, but all of the birds that come in will knock seeds around, and the rats are eating those. But the fox squirrels would love to get in, find a nest of baby rats and eat the young. And I remember, and I think you remember, Ellen, when we saw somebody who shared a video on their smartphone that actually showed a fox squirrel coming down a tree and moving towards a bush, and then moving away as a rat came out and moving back up the tree. So it was an aggressive interaction, and that fox squirrel didn't want to mess around with that rat, as I recall. So there are interactions between the two. And actually, getting back to something Katrina said about parasites, I think if we ended up seeing any fleas on the fox squirrels, they would be rat fleas, because they're kind of generalist fleas that can get onto other animals as well. And the same thing also with internal parasites. Once they start eating insects and stuff like that are important intermediate hosts for some of the nematodes and other things, I think that might be something that would happen. But yeah, these kind of biotic interactions between different mammals, between mammals and birds, I mean, they go much beyond predation and stuff like that. And they involve these sort of things that you don't think of, like sharing of parasites and competition for food resources that often is invisible. Good questions.
Fabulous questions coming through, and thank you, Katrina and Lynn, for helping to answer those. And some of your questions are getting answered via typing here, because we've got about 10 minutes left with you. Eric, there are lots of questions from people asking about, the squirrels being detrimental to an ecosystem, or especially as an introduced species, fox squirrel. And people asking about population size. How do you know when there are too many fox squirrels? And are there things that we can do to help contain populations without, say, poisoning them?
I don't think so. I don't think that there's anything we can do for the last part of that question, that we can do to contain them. I mean, it wouldn't be worth it. I think that they're, in terms of detrimental, I sort of tried to answer that earlier. I think there's very little likelihood that they will be ecologically detrimental, because I think that they're going to be restricted to the urban environment, which is already a mix of native and non-native things to begin with. I mean, I like fox squirrels. I love them. They're really interesting animals, but they don't belong here. So if we could rewind the tape, I would not want to have them here, because they do cause problems with people. But yet people like them, and somebody brought them here. It seems it had to have been a purposeful introduction. Yeah, I mean, one could have hitched a ride on a truck and gotten here, but the likelihood of it being a pregnant female is pretty limited. I think it came in as a pet. Fox squirrels and other tree squirrels, particularly if you get them when they're very young, they make pretty good pets. I mean, they're not like a lap dog, but they are intelligent animals, relatively intelligent, and they're tractable. They can be tamed down to the point where they don't bite you. They can run around on you, things like that. So there's a lot of things that make them attractive to people. But if I think they're going to be here, there might be natural processes eventually that would cause the population to crash just as rapidly as it really took off. I don't know what they would be, but it's possible. But I think that they're here. I think that they're going to be here, and we have to learn how to live with them and minimize the kind of damage that they can do, and try to emphasize the things that are positive about them, in terms of being attractive and interesting animals that can get people interested in nature, even if they aren't native, to our region. Yeah, we have to learn to roll with the punches and find the positive things about them.
Someone a couple weeks ago, when we were at the museum handing out some incentive prizes to people who participated in Squirrel Fest and earned a squirrel bandana, was that someone was asking me about the purpose of this data collection. What are we going to be using this data for? Does it help with management practices? And I think that you're just sort of speaking to maybe the beginnings of that. Right now we're in data collection phase, gathering a bunch of information, some of which we did not know about at all. And then eventually down the line, that's the kind of information that can help with management, and knowing that we are going to be living with squirrels for
Yeah, I mean, it's still early days. The real advantage of the Squirrel Project that we're engaged in is that we didn't get in on the ground floor. The fox squirrels probably arrived around 2020, or excuse me, 2010, maybe a little bit later than that. And we didn't see them in iNaturalist until, what was it, 2013. So, but we still got into it early enough that we can monitor how an introduced species either fits in or doesn't fit in ecologically, and that is something that is understudied. And I think it's probably one of the principal things that is interesting about urban ecology, because the communities, the wild communities or the natural communities in the urban areas are an interesting mix of native and non-native species. And it's very dynamic, because these things are always coming in. It'll probably only be a short period of time before the next mammal species is introduced. I was surprised when it was the fox squirrel. I kind of expected it to be the eastern gray squirrel, which are, even in general areas where the two species occur together, is the predominant one that's in the urban environment. When I lived in Lawrence, Kansas, and had first moved there, fox squirrels were the dominant ones. And soon after that, they became displaced. There was a study by a graduate student that showed that they were not, they weren't eliminated in the urban environment, but they were outcompeted by gray squirrels. Both grays and foxes are native to eastern Kansas, so that was something that was, it was a natural turnabout. But if somebody introduced, no, I shouldn't even say it because I wouldn't want the experiment to be run. I don't want to see gray squirrels here. I don't want to see these new things being arrived because ultimately we might find that the fox squirrel is not a problem, but we might find that we were just lucky in that respect. Or it might turn out to be a problem ecologically. I don't think that'll be the case. It's just, it's just too bad that when we move things around, it has unforeseen consequences. And introductions are always problematic. It doesn't matter whether they're accidental or purposeful. They're always problematic. And I think at least I feel that unequivocally. Wildlife biologists might not feel that the same way. Most of our game animals, or many of our game animals, have been introduced. They haven't caused ecological problems as far as I know, but they certainly could. Sorry.
In our last
soapbox, but
oh, Eric, you're the best on a soapbox. I think it's great. That's what we tune in for. So we've got 4 minutes left here together. Let's see if we can rapid fire some of these a little bit, Eric, if you can. Quick question from Alan. Are cavity nests competing with the Western screech owl, or is that a different cavity nest altogether?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of cavities that the screech owls are requiring, but that's a good point, and it's not one that I considered. I mean, I still hear, and I love to hear a screech owl in my backyard periodically. I don't know where it's nesting, but I would want that to be protected from, from a place where a fox squirrel could move into it. The same way I would like to have Lewis's woodpeckers in cottonwood groves in the valley rather than starlings. Okay, so that's an example of a real bad introduction. It took a long time to get here, but it did get here, and there were profound differences.
Here's our next question. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not being short, so I need to.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Are you surprised to see a squirrel climb multi-levels of a brick building?
I'll answer that one. So I was actually just talking to my neighbor about this as we were watching one climb the building the other day. They're really good at climbing. I mean, they're tree squirrels and they have really, really sharp claws. I mean, you can see it in some of the photos, but when we look at them up close, they're these really incredible claws. And so they evolved to climb, and they'll climb on rocks too, in the wild, but yeah, they're very avid climbers.
How far does a squirrel range in search of food?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that. I think that not incredibly far. They're fairly territorial. So they sort of establish a range that would be, I mean, certainly less than a kilometer, I would imagine. But I don't know. Maybe Eric has more information on that.
Well, from what I've read, and it makes sense to me, females are more territorial. They'll defend really good nesting sites and also food sites because they're the ones that are rearing young and staying with the young until they're weaned. They're not monogamous, these squirrels. So, but on the other side, males are they're pretty territorial when it comes to interacting with one another, and they're the ones that are principally dispersing, or they're doing more dispersal, probably longer dispersing than females are.
Last question, I'm going to combine two here together about drays. Do squirrels use the same drays year after year or build new ones? And could we build nest boxes for them to keep them being less destructive?
I don't know for sure the answers to each of those, to both of those, I should say. I would think that drays are probably things that are easily built. They may abandon a dray and then come back to it, or a different squirrel might come back to it, but it would essentially have to be rebuilt, given the nature of them. I mean, I think a lot of animals will move away from a previous nest because it's a place where ectoparasites concentrate, one aspect of their existence. I know that this is the case with birds, but yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that answer. Good question. And putting up boxes, nest boxes, I think maybe squirrels might use them.
Would they use other things like abandoned magpie nests? Would they take advantage of
Yes,
those?
yes.
Great. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to join us, asking your wonderful questions. I'm so sorry if we didn't quite get to everything that you've asked. We've got records of these. This is so helpful for us to see what you're interested in. We'll start to update things on our website to share some more of this info. Know that we're going to keep talking about fox squirrels. We're so grateful to the community for contributing data to this project. Our Fox Squirrel Research Project is collecting data year-round, so you can be contributing today about fox squirrel information you're seeing outside of your own home or wherever you happen to be. Thank you in advance for helping us learn more about squirrels in the state. Like I said, you'll be hearing more from us down the line, so stay tuned, but be in touch with us as you've got questions on squirrels. Thanks again to Eric Rickert, Katrina Dierig, and Lynn Zumo, my wonderful colleagues and fellow lovers of squirrels at the Natural History Museum of Utah. We'll see you all next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.